I read 10 more books, and instead of doing a normal wrap-up kind of thing, I thought it would be fun to rank them, and I'll start with the book I love the most, and then slowly make my way to my least favorite books I read recently. So yes, we are ranking book wrap-ups now, because why not? And yes, I'm starting with the best books first, because I know most of you will not watch this whole video, and therefore I want to leave you with some recommendations in case you click off early. But it is worth saying to the end, because the book at the bottom of the list is a very big surprise, which is really unfortunate. Now fortunately, I didn't hate any of these 10 books, and I would actually recommend all of these 10 books, so I'll definitely count that as a win. But first up, my favorite book I read recently is definitely The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I've already made a full spoiler review for this book, so I won't say much except that this is arguably the best plot-driven book I have ever read. Now, I'm very much a character-driven reader, but for some reason, this book just worked perfectly for me, and I'm currently reading Wall of Storms, which is book 2 in the series, and it is so good. I'm fully expecting the Dandelion Dynasty to become one of my all-time favorite series now. But yes, if you want to hear more about why I love this book so much, make sure to check out the review I made, because this book is definitely not for everyone. But I gave The Grace of Kings 4.5 stars and would definitely recommend it. On spot number 2, we have The Jade Setters of Janloon, which is a prequel novella for the Greenbone saga, and this novella honestly blew my mind. I mean, this is officially now my new all-time favorite novella, because it was just so good. I read this short novella in one sitting and almost got a book hangover afterwards, even though it was only around 150 pages. What I would say is that I would recommend reading the Greenbone saga first, but yeah, I found the characters to be incredibly compelling in this novella, which is absolutely mind-blowing considering how short this book is. And I loved learning more about one of the smaller clans in this universe. Now obviously I'm 100% biased here because I am a huge Greenbone saga fan. I love this novella and I gave it 5 stars, and the only reason why it's not on spot number 1 is due to its length. I mean, it's very short. Now before moving on to spot number 3, I just briefly want to mention that I'm currently trialing a book related Discord server, so if you want to support what I do here and join a Discord where book chats, rants and discussions are encouraged, then definitely make sure to check out my Patreon. Now this server might go fully live someday, but for now it's only for my patrons, as I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with it. Alright, let's get back to the video. Now moving on spot number 3 we have Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill, book 3 in one of my favorite ongoing series, The Bound and the Broken. This book is absolutely a beast and is around the same length as Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, and the most insane thing is that this book was written, edited and published within 9 months. I mean, that is insane. Now, I won't say much about this book because this is the 3rd book in a series, but if you enjoy classic fantasy with a modern voice, or if you love like John Gwynne for example, then this series is a must read. I mean, Kyle's writing just gets better and better, and this story is truly epic in scope, and the world building is phenomenal. Now, my only real complaint is that this book just felt a bit too long. I mean, I actually had to put down this book halfway through it due to its length and read something else, which was actually honestly a great decision, because when I came back to this book, I was so excited to continue. But yeah, this is not my favorite book in this series, but it's definitely one of the better books I read this year, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Now, on spot number 4, we have a book that I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about in the booktube community, which is Sealed Empire by Norbert, and I won't even try to pronounce that last name. I've actually already made a full spoiler-free review for this book on my channel, because this book honestly exceeded my expectations in nearly every way, and had without a doubt one of the most insane and unique endings I have ever come across in fantasy, and I kinda just want more people to read this book so I can discuss that ending with people. Is the Sealed Empire a masterpiece? Probably not, but there's just something overly addictive about this book, which I don't really know how to explain what I mean there. I mean, the mix of fantasy and sci-fi, and then you also have this one POV, which almost feels like a psychological thriller kind of vibe, and then also you have ruthless pacing, which just made the overall experience really entertaining and enjoyable. But I should make it clear that the author is a patron of mine, which is not a reason why I picked it up, but I thought I should just mention it. Also, how amazing is this cover? Now moving on to spot number 5, we have Fonda Lee's novella Untethered Sky, which is a story which does not take place in the same universe as the Greenbone saga. Now, this novella was one of my most anticipated reads of the year, and for the most part, it did live up to my expectations, which is great. And yes, again, I am biased here because I love fondly. But there were so many things I loved about this story. Now, this novella takes place in a world where humans are not on the top of the food chain, but they are at risk of getting killed by these mighty beasts called manticores. Now, to counter this impending threat, we have these riders that pair themselves with these huge birds, as we can see on the cover, and these birds are called rocks, and these birds are capable of killing these manticores. Now, what did I love about this novella? Firstly, I thought it had an incredibly interesting take on the animal pet companion trope, because these birds are so wild and they actually don't really care for humans. I mean, the only reasons why these birds in this world don't fly away from the humans is due to routine and not due to having a strong emotional bond. Now, also secondly, I found the characters to be incredibly compelling and the world to be so fascinating. I mean, my only real complaint is that I felt that this could easily have been a full-length novel and maybe the plot could have been a bit more intricate. I mean, I really enjoyed this novella, but it just felt a bit too short. I mean, I wanted so much more, which is actually my only real criticism here. But overall, I really enjoyed reading this novella and I would definitely recommend it. However, beware that tour pugs tend to price their physical books at absolutely ridiculous prices, so it might not be worth to buy a physical book of this one. Then on spot number 6 and 7, we have the first two books in the Books of Babel series by Josiah Bancroft. Now, I've had this series on my TBR for so long, and I've been so excited to give this a read because it sounded so unique and weird, and I am always on the lookout for a series that is able to bring something new and fresh to the table. So let me just start by saying, I really enjoyed the first two books in the series, but they are not new favorites of mine yet. Now, the first book, Send in a Sense, is a really solid book with an absolutely insane concept. We basically follow this character called Senlin as he takes his wife to the Tower of Babel for their honeymoon, and this tower is not a normal tower. I mean, when you enter this tower, it's almost like stepping through a portal into a new world, because this tower feels so massive on the inside, and each level is like a totally new country almost, with a different culture and so on. Now, this book starts with Senlin and his wife arriving at the Tower of Babel, and in a split second he loses her, and then Senlin he goes on this mad quest to find his wife back and bring her home. I mean, the concept is absolutely wild and fascinating because this almost feels like an epic fantasy, but it all takes place within this one huge and mad tower. Now, my only real complaint about book 1 in this series is that I found the protagonist, Thomas Senlin, to be too 2D dimensional, and I really felt like the love between him and his wife wasn't that compelling, but overall I really enjoyed my time with it. Then book 2, The Arm of the Sphinx, was a huge step up in quality when it came to characterization, and just the fact that this book was slightly more slow paced, which was brilliant. I mean, I absolutely loved the first 70% of the second book, but then something happened. Suddenly, The Arm of the Sphinx took a big turn, and now instead of being quite a focused story, it feels like we're going to get a story that is epic in scale, which is very much not something I want from this series. Now, fantasy authors, they love to make everything epic in scale and have high stakes, which is why I found this series to be so refreshing, because the main plot is basically about a man trying to find his wife, but now it feels like in book 3 and 4 that we're not going to have a very focused story anymore. It feels like we're going to have a very different story. So basically, I'm really worried about the direction this series is now taking, but nonetheless, I really enjoyed the first two books and I remain hopeful they will continue to be to my taste. Now, I'll also discuss the first book in the series for more than an hour on Philip Chase's channel if you're interested. Now, moving on to spot number 8, we have The Way of a Dan by Philip Chase. Now, I also made a full spoiler review for this book, so I would just recommend checking that video out. But basically, if you're looking for a very solid traditional classic fantasy with a almost Tolkien-esque kind of writing, then definitely pick up this book. The Way of a Dan is not a groundbreaking novel in terms of bringing something very new and fresh to the table, but it is a very well written and enjoyable book. I gave The Way of a Dan 3.5 stars, and as I mentioned, I have a full review for it on my channel if you're interested. Now, on spot number 9, we have A Gamble of Gods by Mitchell Faywood, and the author kindly sent me this beautiful copy with these amazing sprayed edges. Now, let me start by saying that I think that this book deserves a wider audience than it has, because this is a very solid portal fantasy with some great friendships, and it is paced pace really well. So if you're looking for a novel that blends both sci-fi and fantasy elements, and that is overall just quite entertaining and has a unique take on the found family trope, then definitely pick up this book. I mean, the only reason why I'm not rated this higher is because I didn't really relate to the characters, and I found some of them to lack depth. But I do blame Robin Hobb for that, because I feel like I've become much more critical when it comes to character work after reading The Realm of the Elderlings. However, I will say that the last 70 pages of this book were actually really great and created enough intrigue that I might actually give book 2 a read. I mean, we will see. But on the 10th spot, and the biggest disappointment of the last 10 books I read will probably shock you, but unfortunately that is The Golden Fool by Robin Hobb. Now, is this a bad book? Most certainly not, but nonetheless I did find it disappointing, especially when you consider some of the other books in the series and how good they are. I mean, The Fool's Errand, which is book 1 in the Tournament trilogy, is some of Hobb's best writing to date. The amount of emotions that book evoked in me was immense, and then you get to book 2 and you get this story which was basically just a big disappointment in my opinion, because I'm not joking, this book barely has any plot, and I'm not even exaggerating. Almost nothing happens of importance in this 600 plus page book. If there ever was a middle book syndrome, then this is it. And I find it crazy that this book is this long, because you could easily have written this story in 250 pages. In this book, we basically just follow Fitz as he's walking around and chatting with people, and for the most part, almost nothing happens, and I'm just so confused about this book. That being said, it's not like this book is totally pointless, because we have some really interesting character moments, and towards the end of The Golden Fool, we finally start to understand where the story is actually heading. And as always with any Robin Hobb book, the prose and the characterizations are what makes these books so good. So even though this is now my least favorite Hobb book, it definitely doesn't come anywhere near to being a book I hate or anything. It's just the fact that most of the other books in the series are so much more compelling that I found this to be a big disappointment. Now, I gave The Golden Fool 3 stars, which is not a bad rating. So that is it. Have you read any of these books? Do you agree or disagree with me? Definitely let me know your thoughts, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to my patrons for what I do here. I really appreciate it.